Good morning, Kenya, and good evening, Southern California. This is a moment with Kasisi, where I bring you a Bible study and my musing, what I call my musing with the Greek text and my English rendition, as well as my Gĩkũyũ translation. But most importantly, I also deal with the issues of interpretation and the question of application, where we desire to go deeper into understanding not just the context of the text, but also looking at the larger picture that the writer of the text is intending to, or was intending to pass on to us. And last week, I dealt with priorities, where we encountered Jesus in John chapter 2, verse 13 and 14. And I raised the question of priority, where the Jews of the time were using the temple as a space where they could sell, they could do transactions that were helpful in the process of promoting the temple itself, and also supporting the work that was already happening within the temple. But I was pushing the idea that they had their priorities wrong. And my application at that time is that when we have our own application wrong, we are unable to accomplish that which we've been called to deal with. And today, we're still on John chapter 2, but moving now to verse 15 and 16, we will be looking at what happens when we have our priority wrong, is that we tend to use or twist truth to fit in within our comfortable spaces, and also to fit in with the plans that we have, because we definitely are moving priorities from what they are to something else. So eventually, truth is what is that which suffers a lot when our priorities are wrong. Again, my name is Kasisi Kĩriakũ Kĩnyua, and I welcome you to this moment. As we begin this broadcast, live broadcast, I want to bring to your attention two phrases from the text that we are dealing with. And this is John 2, 15 and 16. As I mentioned to you, that I will not be going into the Greek text as I've been doing before, but raising a few, maybe a phrase like today, I would be dealing with two phrases from the Greek text. But here is my English translation of John 2, 15, 16, as a continuation of what we were dealing with last week. And I have it as this: and having made a whip, now this is Jesus himself, having made a whip from cords, he casted out, or threw out, or drove out all the sheep and the cattle from the temple, and he spilled out the money exchangers' coins, and he overturned the tables. Na arĩkia gũthondeka nyahunyu ĩna njagatha cia ndigi, akĩrutũrũra ng'ondu na ng'ombe ciothe kuma hekarũ-inĩ, na agĩitũrũrania thendi cia onjorithia a mbeca. In line 16, I have it as, and to the selling ones, those who were selling, he said, "Take away the doves from here. You do not make my father's house a market house." Na akĩra endia acio, "Rutai ndutura ici kuma gũkũ. Mũtigũtua nyũmba ya awa, nyũmba ya uthogori. The two phrases that I want to direct you to, I'll begin with the first one, is the one that references from the temple. And this is a ectu hero, from the temple. It is important to note in this particular section that we are dealing with that Jesus does not, in John, Jesus does not use the whip upon the individuals that were selling. In John, he used the whip to remove the cattle and the lamb and the sheep from the temple. Then he overturned the tables and threw away the money that they were exchanging. Now, why is from the temple important? It will come apparent to us as we move on that there are several underlying themes in the book of John that have been highlighted in chapter 1 that we have already dealt with. In chapter 1, or what is usually called the prologue, particularly verse 1 to 8, but I can go on to up to maybe verse 18 or so, you find that John, the writer, summarizes the ideas that you run through the book. We have already encountered one, and this is a newness. There is that underpinning theme of newness, and this is what is found in the miracle at Cana of Galilee. But today, I am going to suggest to you that there are other major themes that we encounter in these two lines. And the first one is in regard to the temple. But to understand it, you have to go back to chapter 1 and verse 17, which talks about, for Moses gave the law. Grace and truth, and this is my translation, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. At that point, when we were dealing with this, I raised the question, why Moses? And why bring Moses and write as he, John, is introducing the incarnated Christ? So, to begin with, to understand the reason why the temple here is important, we have to understand the connection between Jesus and Moses in this case. If you have studied the New Testament, you've gone into deeper studies and fully understand the concept behind the writing of these texts, you find that individual writers have specific theological positions that they will take. For example, in Matthew, we find that even though he references Moses, his aim is to show to the Jewish Christians that Jesus himself was actually a Jew first, and that he is the new Moses. And we can, if we are dealing with Matthew, we can go deeper into that. In John is approaching the concept of Jesus as the Messiah, not just as the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, but as God incarnate, God who has taken the human form. And the idea of the temple connects with what Moses, well, we'll take it that it is Moses who said these things. In the book of Deuteronomy 18:15, we find that Moses here is literally directed by God to speak to the Hebrew people and say, because of what you have requested of me, down the line, in the distant future, I will bring to you a prophet who will arise from amongst you. And there is a promise of a prophet. The text says that God's word will be in his mouth, and he will speak the truth. And any listener who fail to respond to the truth will be held by God accountable. That is one point that I would want us to articulate, that I would want to articulate at this point, that if you think John 1:17 and the reason why Moses came to bring the law, and then is juxtapositioned with Jesus himself bringing grace and truth, you will begin to understand why the temple is very important to the writer of the gospel. And I'll push this further and go now to the second phrase that I think is quite important in what we're dealing with. Beside the ek to Aaron from the temple, the removing of people from the temple, and connecting that with what Moses spoke of, a prophet who would come and would bring truth. The second phrase is, you do not make my father's house a market. Jesus in John calls the temple my father's house. It is important for every Christian who interprets the gospel to see always the connection between the Hebrew ideas that we find in the Hebrew text and the ideas that we find in the New Testament. Why would Jesus reference to the temple as my father's house? If my rendition here is correct, that the reason why we have Moses and Jesus in chapter 1 of John is to direct us to the one who is bringing in the truth, the one that Moses spoke about in Deuteronomy 18, we will also see the connection with Jesus and the temple. And here is the connection. First of all, in the book of Exodus, and this will take a little while because I need to bring up some texts from the Old Testament that are very important in making the connection why you do not make my father's house a market house is important, and why Jesus is referencing to the temple as my father's house. In Exodus 25, this is the first time we hear God establishing or giving instructions to the Hebrew people to establish something close or that resembles a temple, and this is the tabernacle. And in Exodus 25:8, we read, then, this is Moses being given the instructions, then have them make a sanctuary for me. And God says, I will dwell among them. They will make a sanctuary and I will dwell among them. And in Exodus 25 and 26, definitely we begin to see the development, then the bringing to fruition the tabernacle. And in Exodus 26, we find that God tells Moses that that tabernacle should be constructed or should be built or should be assembled following a plan that God was going to reveal to Moses on the mountain. That is one. That the sanctuary that they are going to construct, which is at this point the tabernacle, first of all, is coming from God. And God says, once you construct it, I'm going to dwell amongst you. And then that temple, you just don't build a temple, a tabernacle. I will give you instructions of how to construct that tabernacle. And instructions were given if you read further in the book of Exodus. Then the other important idea of the temple comes again from Deuteronomy 12. And now this moves the idea of the tabernacle to something bigger. That for the time they are in the wilderness, the tabernacle survives. And we know from Numbers and even Deuteronomy and also the book of Exodus that when it was completed, a cloud covered the tabernacle, meaning that the presence of the divine came down and dwelt amongst them. And every time they were on the move, that cloud would lift up and would move with them. Anytime they stopped, the cloud would stop and would again fill the tabernacle. Now, in Deuteronomy 12, we are told, now when you come to the land of promise, when you get to your rest, you will build me a place of worship in the space that I will show you. That is God again giving instructions. And so when David eventually in 2 Samuel 7, when he captures Jerusalem, he decides that he's going to fulfill what God had talked about. He was going to be the one to build the temple. But of course, we learned from the prophet Nathan saying that, no, you're not the one. God says, it is from your son who is going to build the temple. And God says, build a house for my name. And through that house, your throne, you, David, will be eternal. Stay with me, because I don't want to lose you in the idea that I'm going back to of why Jesus calls the temple my Father's house. The final element in this idea now moves to actualization through King Solomon. And we read this in chapter 6, where he builds the temple according to the plan that he was given by his father. This again you can read in Chronicles, I think in 2nd Chronicles, where you find that Solomon, King Solomon, built the temple using the instructions that were given by his father. And those instructions came from God. I hope you don't forget that the tabernacle itself was going to be built and constructed according to God's plan, and God would come and dwell amongst them. When the temple was completed by King Solomon in 1 Kings 9:3, this is what God says to the king: I have consecrated this temple that you have constructed by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. So the similar idea that now God comes to dwell within his people, but now it's a permanent dwelling. In the wilderness, it was not permanent. As long as they were on the move, it would lift up, and when they stop, then it would stop with them. What is my point? That the temple was actually an earthly representation of the eternal house of God, the dwelling space of God. That what was being built here on earth was a representation, mfano, of what the dwelling of God looks like. And this is why the temple the instructions of constructing the temple are given by God himself. They're not supposed to just to build it the way they think. It is a transcendent model. The one that is here on earth is a transcendent model. And for that reason, it is holy. Therefore, when Jesus, the incarnated God, who is introduced in John 1 as God incarnate, when he comes, if we accept, and there is no reason to doubt it, if we accept that he is God incarnate, he knows that eternal temple. He knows that transcendent sanctuary through which the plan is used to be moved and has been moved here on earth. So, in chapter 2 of John, Jesus goes down to Jerusalem, and he enters the temple for the first time. And we are told he found out that people were selling and buying. So he makes his own whip and he drives out. Point being that God, who is now incarnate, find that these people who are doing honorable things by raising money and selling stuff to help in the temple were losing the very point of why the temple was constructed. The temple was constructed to be the dwelling place of God, and as a representation of that which is above in heaven in God's space, in heaven. Therefore, those who would take economic factors to propagate or to continue in this whole idea of supporting the temple were missing the point and dishonoring the history that I've just elaborated as to how the temple came, though briefly, and I know I've not done justice in that history because I've just summarized so quickly, but they dishonor that very history. And again, we find that when King Solomon was constructing the temple and after the completion, God says he will dwell there eternally. So this is the dwelling place of God. So when you are literally selling in that space, you are dishonoring the very presence of the one who gave that purpose. Through the temple, the throne of David was to remain eternal. And through David, the Messiah would come. Through the temple, the representation of the eternal covenant would always be with the people of God. Therefore, those who sell, literally again, dishonor that eternal covenant, which is also the dwelling of God. So, truth is revealed by Jesus. And the truth, because the one of the other themes that I'm going to talk about, which is very important in the book of John, is Jesus being revealed not just as the incarnate God, but also the revealer of truth, and truth here in capital T, not just wisdom, truth. And we find truth here revealed. You do not make my Father's house a market house. So it is not just a house because that is where they have the priest, because that is where they have the Holy of Holies. And I hope, and by this time, by the time Jesus is coming on scene, sacrificial systems are kind of, dying out, and meaning is being found in the interpretation of the text. So it is not so much about that space called Holy of Holies or priests who are in this temple. It is more because it is that representation of that which is in heaven, which is the Father's house in heaven, and the model of that house is here on earth. And Jesus, and actually in Greek, he uses imperative, what is called the imperative commands. He says, you do not make my Father's house a market house. And another interesting part is how the market house is constructed. In this market house is constructed like in opposition of God's house. So that truth is revealed. And it brings me to my final comments about the application part of it. That the theological part is deep in that it connects this with the historical construction of the temple and Jesus as the revealer of truth, who kind of, is at par with Moses, but greater than Moses. Moses brings the law. Jesus brings grace and truth. And therefore, when he talks about God's house, my Father's house, he actually calls it my Father's house. And remember, there's nowhere in John he's going to call Joseph my father. You're not going to hear that. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure. Even in other Gospels, you hear Jesus calling Joseph my father, but he refers to God as his father. And what we find is that those people who are selling in the temple, they were bedding truth for their convenience. They were bedding truth for their comfort, in that they will gain, sure, but they are supporting the temple. The truth here is they are supporting the temple, the work of God, but they are gaining themselves. They are dishonoring the house. They are dishonoring history. They are dishonoring the rest of God, the throne of God, the eternal covenant, the dwelling place of God. And eventually, judgment comes upon those who bed truth. You come to think about it. For most of us who are living in our day, in this day and age, as Christians, we know for sure our own calling. We understand the reason why we have been assembled as a team that work for God. But woe unto us if we conveniently decide to not set our priority right. If we conveniently set those priorities on another line so that we may benefit, then we are bending truth. And the truth, when the truth is bent, it's just like, that I believe it's the an experiment that I believe we used to do in physics, where you were asked to dip a pencil in a glass of water, and then you look from the side, and you would see that that pencil bent, or that ruler that you dip in the water bent. The fact of the matter is that truth cannot be bent, but whatever you're looking through, water, glass, and all that, it seemingly bends truth. So when we conveniently attempt to bend the truth, truth will never be bent, but we will be shifting our goalposts to serve and benefit ourselves, while seemingly we are doing a great job. We are supporting the temple. We are supporting the ministry. My appeal to all of us this evening is to take out of these two verses and be reminded the importance of Jesus himself coming is going to be revealed in 17 and 18, and how now the temple takes no meaning in Jesus. The eternal element of the temple takes no meaning in Jesus. My point today again, and I hope you've been with me this far, and that you continue understanding exactly what I'm talking about. We have to choose to take the text at its micro level, the bits that I've tried to break down, and also the larger picture of the underlying theme. The main theme today is that Jesus is the revealer of truth. And one of the truths that he has revealed is that you do not make my Father's house a market house. There is a history to honor. There is a God to honor. There is a tradition to honor. There is an eternal covenant to honor. And when we bed it, judgment comes upon his people. Once again, I invite you to continue walking with me in this journey. And next week, we'll be looking at why Jesus now is going, or rather, the new meaning that Jesus is going to bring upon this temple. If you are blessed with what you're hearing, I invite you to like, to share, to comment, and even visit my YouTube channel as given down below. And you can subscribe, and I invite you to subscribe so that even if you miss one of any of my sessions, you can also come back and look at that. In the meantime, stay blessed and fulfill the will of God in our lives without conveniently setting our priorities so that we can bed the truth. We are called not to bed the truth, but to proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ. May the Lord be with you. May the Lord bless you. And you have a good day as we have a good night here in California. Bye-bye.